King Bhumibol Adulyadej's vision for advancing Thailand's development through the establishment of an advanced educational institution to prepare people to become agents of change for national development.
Kunjo, do you know that our late King Rama IX actually had a discussion with Mr. David Rockefeller of the Rockefeller Foundation in the United States 54 years ago in order to find out a way to improve our country's economy and perhaps set up an institute just for that purpose. And 3 years later, His Majesty's vision materialized and NIDA was born.
And NIDA actually was established with financial support from the prestigious Ford Foundation in the USA and academic assistance from the Midwest Universities Consortium for International Activities, the official accrediting organization of all U.S. institutions of higher education. And then NIDA became an educational institute of higher education for Thai scholars who would otherwise go study abroad. And under benevolent auspices of His Majesty the late King, NIDA stands today as Thailand's leading educational institution, concentrating exclusively on graduate students, and that actually sets us apart from other universities because we only offer graduate courses. We do not have any undergraduate programs here.
Exactly. And if you have never been here before, you might also want to notice the logo of the university, which is on the cover page of the booklet that you have in your hand right now. If you do not have one, do you have one or not, please? In that case, you might want to, right after our self-introduction, you might want to go out to the registration table and scan the QR code, and the information will also appear on the screen of your mobile phone too. The logo of our university, if you are Thai, and you're probably familiar with it, but Kunjo will tell you later what it symbolizes. But those of you who are here for the very first time, if you're not Thai, you might notice that the logo is actually very similar to what most universities in the West and also some universities in Thailand have in common. Very, very similar, except that the Western ones have the Latin phrase, the labor omnia vincit, which means work conquers all. But in our case, we have Pali instead.
Yes, right. And actually, it is the wheel of Dharma with a Pali phrase on top with 8 spokes that symbolize the Noble Eightfold Path. And the Pali phrase reads, Natti Panya Samma Apa, which means using our knowledge in the right way based on the Noble Eightfold Path can lead to the prosperity of the country and also the humanities as a whole.
Yes, and let us tell you a little bit about the Graduate School of Language and Communication. Currently, our Graduate School of Language and Communication offers a variety of degree programs in both English and Japanese. Our English language programs include a Master of Arts and a Doctorate in Language and Communication, a Master of Arts in English for Professional Development, and a Master of Arts and a Doctorate in Teaching English as an International Language. The Japanese program includes a Master of Arts in Japanese Communication and Culture, and it is our hope to produce graduates and experts in language, communication, and teaching who possess academic excellence, integrity, and morality.
And because I'm a PhD candidate here, so let me talk a little bit about the program here. PhD programs, we have 2 programs, one in language and communication, and the other is teaching English as an international language. I'm in the formal one, and we have courses in media communication, discourse analysis, and it is important to emphasize that our courses are interdisciplinary in nature. So we see both language and culture as one. So we do not separate them as 2 entities.
Yes.
And that's, for me, that's quite special.
Let's get back to the theme here.
Okay, now, shall we talk a little bit about the theme of this conference is reclaiming language, communication, and culture for a sustainable society. This is not a very usual or common theme. You wouldn't see, I guess, you wouldn't see this kind of theme elsewhere. So I was wondering, why do we have to reclaim language and culture and communication? Does it suggest that something has been lost along the way?
Yes, I can see a lot of puzzled looks on the, in the audience right now. Reclaiming language and communication, a lot of you probably are wondering why we have to do that. Have we lost language and communication already? The answer is actually we haven't lost it yet, but probably on the way. We are probably on
Yes,
the way
yes.
there. Our Thai government is actually working very hard on the Thailand 4.0 economic model in order to pull Thailand out of the middle income trap and push us back into the, not back, but push us further
Forward,
into
yes.
the high income level. Therefore, the stress is actually on science and technology, which, by the way, is nothing wrong with that. The problem is that we believe that language and communication should go hand in hand with science, not separately. Okay. In fact, I had a metaphor too. I was
Really?
actually having breakfast this morning at the cafeteria, and I was thinking, if I were to eat food, for example, using just a spoon, okay, it would probably be very difficult to pick up my food. But if I were to use a fork as well, just like
That's
language,
a nice metaphor, okay.
yes, then it would probably be better. The study of language communication is very important, not only important, but also essential to the enrichment of culture, intellect, and our nation as a whole.
Right, that's very interesting. I think we have an important reminder here. When you register this morning, if you notice that your name has been or was misspelled, please let our staff members know so we can make any adjustments or corrections necessary, because it's going to appear on your certificates. So you want to make sure that it's spelled correctly.
And I think we want to give you a bit of time to relax first. We have a few more minutes before.
Right. Because we are
yes.
going to start at 9:30.
9:30,
Yes.
exactly, yeah. So
Okay.
if you want to go to
Get the booklet.
the booklet and also scan your QR code, you can do so now too. And don't forget to grab your refreshments from outside.
All right. And any questions, any assistance, please do let our staff members know so we can help you. Okay.
Have a
Alright. We'll see you back
relaxation
here
time,
again
yes.
in about 20 minutes time.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Research and consulting services. And after that, we will have the pleasure of having our keynote speaker, Professor Dr. John Flaube, to speak to us on the topic of how we can use the data-driven learning approach to help us with our research writing. And that's really important. Then we will take our lunch break from 11:30 until 1 p.m. At exactly 1 p.m., do not go away yet, because we will have a lot more interesting presentations on the 8th floor of this very same building.
All right. Okay. And just a reminder, don't forget to check your names and to see if it's spelled correctly. Okay. If you need if you have to make any change or any adjustments, please let our staff members know at the registration desk.
And if at all possible, we would like to ask you sitting at the very top to move lower a little bit, please, if you can. Actually, it's safer to the front seat here. If you can actually move to the very front. We tend to ask a lot of questions from people sitting at the very top. So if you don't want to get asked, please move down here. Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you so much. We actually need more people sitting in front right here. So if you could help me move lower to the very front.
Thank you so much.
Yes, please.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Thank you so much.
first of all, we would like to introduce ourselves.
My name is Saksit Lauha Walawutikun, and you can call me Zach. I'm reading for a master's degree in English for professional development.
And my name is Kiatipong Rukwanchai, a PhD candidate in language and communication. On behalf of the organizers, the School of Language and Communication, GSLC, we would like to extend our warm welcome to all the guests to the 8th International Conference on Language and Communication. This international conference provides a platform for researchers, educators, and those interested in multidisciplinary study of language, communication, and culture During these 2 days, we'll hear from 2 world-renowned scholars in discourse studies, language and culture of Thailand, as well as a number of academic and research papers from scholars around the world.
But first, let me tell you a little bit about what we will have today on our agenda. In just a few minutes, we will hear the opening remark by our Vice President for Research and Consulting Services, Professor Dr. Kampon Panyakomet. And after that, we will have the pleasure of having our keynote speaker, Professor Dr. John Flowerdew, speak to us on the topic of how we can use the data-driven learning approach to help us with our research writing. Then we will have our lunch break from 11:30 a.m. until 1 p.m. on the 7th floor. And please do not go away yet, because at exactly 1 p.m. there will be a lot of interesting presentations on the 8th floor of this very same building.
Okay, next, I am honored to invite Professor Dr. Kampon Panyakomet, Vice President for Research and Consulting Services, to deliver a welcome speech. Please welcome Professor Dr. Kampon Panyakomet.
To welcome you to the 8th International Conference on Language and Communications. This year's theme, Reclaiming Language, Communication and Culture for the Sustainable Society, is the most apt and reflective of the current trends in Thai society. As the nation is geared towards sustainable development in line with the United Nations Millennium Goals, the study of human language and communication in all its manifestations can play a fundamental role in making society a better one. The proposed theme of this year's conference testifies to the very fact that the study of language and communication is not only important but also essential to the enrichment of culture, intellect, and nation. The keynote speeches by 2 of the most eminent scholars in the field, I'm certain will make this event all the more thought-provoking, thereby leading the deeper insights into Thai society in the era of globalization. Furthermore, the many parallel sections appear to run the gamut of topics covering the theoretical dimension of language and communication, classroom-based practices, and value of culture, all in the pursuit of broadening new horizons. In closing, I would like to congratulate the School of Language and Communication for making this conference a reality and success. I hope all of you, especially our friends far from the field, will enjoy our time while participating in this conference. Thank you very much.
On language and communication.
And now, we are privileged to have Professor Dr. John Flowerdew as our first guest speaker today. Professor Dr. John Flowerdew was until recently a professor in the Department of English at the City University of Hong Kong, and is now a visiting professor at the University of Lancaster and a visiting research fellow at Birkbeck College, the University of London. During a lengthy career, he has published well over 100 books, journal articles, and book chapters. In fact, he has just published the Routledge Handbook of Critical Discourse Studies with J. Richardson. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Professor Dr. John Flowerdew to give the first keynote speech entitled, Using the Data-Driven Learning Approach to Facilitate the Research Writing of Postgraduate Students. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor Dr. John Flowerdew.
Be here, and I'd like to thank the organizing committee for inviting me to give this talk. This is not my first visit to Thailand, but I always like coming here, and I'm sure I'm going to enjoy my time here again. I'd particularly like to thank Professor Saksit Sambun, who facilitated my visit. We've been communicating for over a year about this, this talk, which I'm about to give you. So the topic of the talk is using the data-driven learning approach to facilitate the research writing of postgraduate students. Now, you may not understand the title. Don't worry. Everything will be explained. Okay, so this is the outline of the talk. I'm going to introduce the notion of corpora and corpus linguistics for ESP, for English for specific purposes. I'm going to give you an example of a corpus project that I've worked on in recent years on abstract nouns, nouns like argument, fact, idea, problem. These are very important nouns in academic writing. Then I'm going to introduce the notion of data-driven learning. Then I'll explain or describe an experimental classroom approach using data-driven learning to teach research writing. And then in the last section, I'll talk about a project that I have been running recently in Hong Kong using data-driven learning, or DDL, as I will refer to it, to teach research students how to write academic papers. Okay, so first of all, the introduction to corpora and corpus linguistics. The word corpus refers to a body of language. The plural of corpus is corpora. Okay, these are Latin words, so it's an irregular plural form. First of all, I need to introduce the notion of language description. Okay, so if we're going to design a language teaching course, we need to have a good description of the language. And recently, the most recent work in language description has been done using corpora, using electronic collections of texts. So here's a definition of the word corpus: a collection of naturally occurring language text in electronic form, selected according to external criteria to represent, as far as possible, a language or language variety as a source of data for linguistic research. So notice here the term language or language variety. So a corpus may represent or sample the whole language, or it may sample just a particular part of the language. So here are some different types of corpora. You can access all of these freely online if you're interested. So to start with, you have general corpora. These are collections of texts which try to include language from many different varieties. So conversation, textbooks, newspapers, novels, meeting language. They try to sample the whole language. So the BNC, the British National Corpus, is a well-known general corpus, and COCA, the Corpus of Contemporary American English, is a similar general corpus with American English in it. Then you have more specific corpora. So the Michigan Corpora of Academic Spoken English and the Michigan Corpus of Upper Student Papers. So the first of these is spoken language, the second one is written language. And then base and bore, these are the British equivalents of the MyCase and the MyCusp. And then you have corpora consisting of learner language. So the ICL and the VESPA corpora, the International Corpus of Learner English, for example, contains English written by students of English. So it's not standard English, it's student English. So you have subcomponents of that collection for, say, Italian English, Spanish English, Thai English, Hong Kong English, etc. And then you have varieties of English. There's only one corpus I know which represents different varieties of English, the ICE corpus, International Corpus of English. This corpus has its native speaker language, but it has different varieties. So it has British English, American English, Kenyan English, Hong Kong English, Australian English, etc. And then we have lingua franca corpora. These are corpora of language of English being used internationally. So it has English used by Germans, for example, or English used by Thais when they communicate with each other in English. So these are all different types of corpus. Now, when we start to analyze corpora, we use what is called a concordancer, and the output is called a concordance. So if you have a look at this concordance here, you can see down the middle the word love. So if you search on the word love in the corpus, this gives you all of the instances of love in their context. So you can see how the word love is used. Here's another one. So here you would search on a phrase, not an individual word. So based on, for example, so you can see how based on is used. And here is another one. You see how you can get the output. You can organize the output in different ways. So if you look here, you'll see that the examples are sorted on the right. So the first word on the right is in alphabetical order, starting with computer, computerized, what's that word? I can't. Computrainers, concerning, conference, etc. So you can sort the output in different ways. Now, when you're doing corpus linguistics, the fundamental principle is frequency. Okay? So the principle more frequent is more important to learn can scarcely be gainsaid as a general principle. This is a comment by Leach. So again, if you're thinking about teaching people the language, you want to teach them the most frequent features of the language. And also, descriptions based on frequency are used in lexicography. For example, in the Longman Dictionary of Contemporary English. They're used in grammars, the Longman Grammar of Spoken and Written English. And they're used in learning materials. When you write learning materials, you try to use the most frequent items. Now, when you're searching in a corpus, you can employ various units of language, of analysis of language. So you can look for single words, you can look for multi-word units, sometimes called collocations or lexical bundles, or you can look at a higher level, what we call a move. This is a larger unit of language. You can look for all of these different units in a corpus. So if you're teaching English for specific purposes or English for academic purposes, you really want a specialist corpus because you're teaching a special type or variety of the language. So in this quotation here, it says frequency counts are least useful when they're based on a general corpus covering a range of the language. They are more useful if they are differentiated for region and register or variety. So a given lexical or grammatical item must be related to its particular rhetorical purpose. Here's another quotation with regard to writing for specific purposes although developing explicit knowledge of grammar can be helpful, the universalist approach to grammar, as found in grammar textbooks, does not work well because the emphasis has shifted to studying the local knowledge of language. So you don't look at a general description of language, but you look at a particular description based on a particular variety. Okay, I'm going to skip that example. Okay, so now I'm going to describe to you very quickly a corpus project that I've been involved in recently, signaling nouns in academic discourse. So what is a signaling noun? You probably haven't come across this term before. Signaling nouns are abstract nouns which function in particular ways in discourse. So examples of signaling nouns would be advantage, case, evaluation, possibility, procedure, situation, solution. So these actually, they're general, they're part of the general vocabulary, but they're very important in academic discourse. So a signaling noun refers to a general area of meaning of which the specific meaning is found elsewhere in the clause or text. And there's an identity of reference between the signaling noun and what I will call the specifics. Okay? So signaling noun is actually a functional, not a formal category. You'll see from the examples I'm going to give you now. So here's a couple of examples in context. So the recognition that it was possible to simulate a prebiotic milieu in the laboratory ushered in a new area in origin of life studies. So if you look at that example, you see the signaling noun is recognition, and then the underlined part is what I call the specifics. It gives you the specific. If I just say recognition, it doesn't really tell you much, does it? But if you look at the underlined part of the clause, this is the specific meaning. What sort of recognition are we talking about? And similarly, the second example, their role is to carry out the depolarizing phase of an action potential. So if I just say the word role, again, it doesn't really tell you much, but the particular role is specified in the underlined part. So I call these, this pattern within clause pattern, because the specifics is part of the same clause where the noun occurs. But they can also function across clauses. So if you look at these examples, you look at the underlined part here. I won't read it all. It's just blah, 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 blah. And then the following sentence says, this situation has changed. So this situation is actually referring back to the preceding bit of text. Yeah? And in the next example, with risk, despite their benefits to medicine, vaccines are not without risk. What do we mean by risk here? Well, in the next sentence it says, if the vaccine maker does not completely inactivate a pathogen, the recipient can actually develop polio or another serious disease. So here, the specifics of risk occurs in the following sentence. So in this study of signaling nouns, with a collaborator, I created a corpus which contained lectures, textbook chapters, and research articles across 10 different disciplines in the natural sciences and the social sciences. The total size of the corpus was just over 600,000 words, and the corpus was annotated or tagged by automatic techniques and by hand. By tagging, I mean each signaling noun in the corpus would have a little label so that you can search for it using the software. So I'm going to show you some of the results here. The overall frequency in the corpus, the most frequent signaling nouns, how the signaling nouns vary by discipline, how they vary across natural and social sciences, and how they vary across different genres. So there were 16,058 signaling nouns in the corpus, yeah? Or tokens rather, yeah? So that means there was one signaling noun every 38 words, or 2.63 per 100 words, or 26,300 per million words. So you can see actually they're very frequent, yeah? You're going to come across these nouns in nearly every sentence, yeah? In terms of types, in terms of the individual particular words, there are 845 signaling noun types in the corpus. So if you think of a learner of academic English, that's quite a lot of vocabulary to learn. You probably wouldn't want to learn all of them, but you can see it's quite a large number of words. Now, can you see that at the back? Yes? Okay, good, right. So if you look here, these are the most frequent signaling nouns in the corpus. So you can see case is the most frequent, and then way, problem. You can see this is what we call the normalized frequency, the number per 100,000. So you can see they're quite common words. So those are the first 15, and then these are the next 15, taking us up to 30. So they're all very common words. You wouldn't say these were technical words, but they do occur in technical language. They're very frequent. Now, we can compare them by discipline. And if we have a look at this table here, you can see that if we look in terms of percentage, we can see that the lowest frequency is in biology, and the highest frequency is in sociology. And there's a very big difference between biology and sociology, yeah? 10% difference, 5% versus 15%. If we combine together the natural sciences, we see they make up 30% of the total, but the social sciences make up nearly 70%. So signaling nouns are twice as frequent in the social sciences as they are in the natural sciences. The reason for this is that in the natural sciences, they have many more technical words, technical nouns, nouns to describe particular phenomena. In the social sciences, we don't have so many of these technical words, so we have to use more general signaling nouns, and then we define the signaling nouns in the context. Okay, now if we compare the signaling nouns by genre, I told you there are 3 genres: journals, textbooks, and lectures. You can, yes, here. You can see that they're most frequent in journals, less frequent in textbooks, and lectures are somewhere in between. Yeah? Lectures and textbooks are less formal than journal articles, so that's why the journals tend to have a higher density of signaling nouns. They have more complex noun phrases. Okay. Now, some of these nouns are particularly frequent in particular genres. So the noun model, 86% of the time that occurs, it's in the journals. Yeah, I don't really need to explain anything. You can just have a look at this table. This word thing is quite interesting. You don't think of thing as a very academic word, and you don't find thing in textbooks or journals very much. It's nearly always in lectures. So the lecturer might come into the lecture and say, okay, today I'm going to tell you about a number of things. First of all, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So thing is very specific to spoken academic language. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to talk about data-driven learning. So I've shown you how we can do corpus linguistics and what we can find out about academic discourse using corpora. Now I'm going to start to talk about how we can actually use the techniques of corpus linguistics to actually teach or learn the language. So data-driven learning, DDL, is a learning approach in which learning is driven by research-like access to linguistic data. So we're using the tools of corpus linguistics, those tools I've shown you, to actually teach the language. I always tell my students not to use Wikipedia, but sometimes it's quite useful. If it's accurate, you need to know if it's accurate or not. In this case, it is. Okay, so second point here, the task of the learner is to discover the foreign language, and the task of the language teacher is to provide a context in which the learner can develop strategies for discovery, strategies through which he or she can learn how to learn. So it's a very much learner-driven approach, data-driven learning. Yeah? So as I've already said, this is done through the use of corpora. And we use frequency and concordancing data here. So students interact with the corpus through the use of software that provides frequency and concordancing data, which I've shown you. The frequency data are lists of words occurring in the corpus, either in order of frequency or alphabetically. So immediately, if you use this approach, if you've got to say a biology corpus, you can find out what the most frequent words are in biology, or if you're studying sociology, you can find immediately the most important words in that discipline. Okay? So the concordance in data, as I've shown you, they show how a given word or phrase is used in context. So the student in data-driven learning is really like a language detective. It's like Sherlock Holmes. Yeah? They try to solve linguistic problems by accessing the corpus. So it's very much an individualized approach. The student, the learner, is doing all the work. The teacher is just the facilitator. Okay, so just as a reminder, here are some more examples, or the ones I've shown you already. This is what the concordance looks like. I've shown you these already. Now, so when we're using a concordance, it can show us different things. So it can show you things about words. It can look at the word level. It can tell you what the most frequent words are. For example, if you have a corpus of research papers in your discipline, yeah? It can operate at the phrase level, show you which phrases words would most commonly appear in. and you can use it to check a phraseology that you're not very sure about. So for example, in Hong Kong, where I've done a lot of my teaching, students write discuss about. Yeah? If you look for discuss about in your corpus, you won't find it, right? So you know, oh, well, native speakers don't say discuss about, they just say discuss. And they don't say emphasize on something, they just say emphasize something. So as a learner, you can find out things about your own use of the language, whether it's accurate or not. You can also study different sections. If you're working with research articles, say, you can focus on the introduction or the methods, the results, the discussion, okay? And so you can say, well, what are the verbs that I should be using in the introduction, for example, or what verbs should I be using in the methods section? And finally, you can look at the discourse level, the whole large units of language. So we can look at what sentence connectors are most commonly used in my discipline, or what words follow this to refer back. I gave you the example, this problem, blah, 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 this problem. So there's a whole range, as I've shown you. In my corpus there were 845 signaling nouns, so it could be any of these. You can find out with the corpus. Okay. So in terms of data-driven learning in English for specific purposes, there's quite a lot of research being done on this, and actually over 150 studies to date. And in a meta-analysis of these studies, in a review of all of the studies, the finding has been that this approach is at least as effective as other teaching approaches. And there's quite a lot of other papers which have looked at how data-driven learning has been used in the classroom. If anybody's interested to see these references that I'm including here, they can just email me afterwards and I'll send you the reference list. I'll send you the PowerPoint too if you like. Just send me an email. Okay, so here are a few of the studies that have been done. You can see the first study was in 1994. And there's a variety of studies, the different foci, so looking at the introductory chapter of a computer user manual, lexico-grammatical features, different sections of the research article, the discussion section of PhD theses, and the different rhetorical strategies used in research articles. So there's quite a lot of work. These are just some examples I'm giving you here. Okay, so what are the advantages of this approach? Okay, well, it can help writers explore disciplinary discourse, as I've already indicated. It can help in both composition and in revision. It individualizes the instruction, so you can have, for example, in the two projects I'm going to describe to you later, there were students from many different disciplines. Yeah, so you can have a student from chemistry working with a chemistry corpus, and you can have a student from linguistics working with a linguistics corpus. You can individualize the learning, so learner autonomy is encouraged, and it provides a resource for future use. So once students know how to do this, they can use this rather like a dictionary as a study aid, as a help in their writing. Other advantages are that these corpora, all of the corpora I'm going to talk about here are free. You can download them from the internet, and you can also make your own corpus if you want to. Okay, now one question with data-driven learning that people have asked is, well, does it have any long-term benefit? So if you teach people to use this approach, do they actually carry on using it later in their academic writing? So there's one study by Charles, Getting the Corpus Habit, EAP students' long-term use of personal corpora. And she found out that a year after having a course with her, 68% of the students used the corpus that they made in her course, and 86% said that they would recommend the approach to other students. Okay, so now I'm going to describe the first of the two projects I said I would talk about. So I'm going to describe an experimental classroom-based approach to the teaching of research writing using data-driven learning. Okay, so in this part I'll talk about the background to this course. I'll briefly talk about previous approaches to genre-based data-driven learning. I'm also going to talk about something else, the use of what I call e-portfolios. I'll explain that. Also the idea of using a textual mentor. I'll explain that. And I'll also talk about language reuse as a learning or a language use strategy for non-native speakers. And then I'll give you a couple of very quick case studies to show how students have used this approach. Okay, so this course I'm going to talk about now was commissioned. The university I used to work in at Hong Kong, City University of Hong Kong, the course was commissioned by the School of Energy and Environment several years ago, actually. And I taught that course, and I taught the course using a couple of books by Swales and Feek. I don't know if any of you have heard of these. Academic Writing for Graduate Students and English in Today's Research World. I used those books. I didn't have much time to prepare the course. And then after that, they didn't want the course again. But then hopefully they didn't, it wasn't because I did a bad job. They just didn't have any money or whatever. But they must have got some money a couple of years down the line, because in 2015, they asked for it again, okay? But this time, it was going to be offered for all the students in science, all postgraduate students in science, or PhD students actually, could take this course. And I taught this course with a PhD student of mine, Simon Wang. We had 24 students in the class. I used the same framework that I used with those two books I told you about, but we wanted to develop the idea of genre, corpora, textual mentors, and language reuse. These were various theoretical concepts, theoretical pedagogical concepts that we wanted to operationalize in this course, and we also wanted to use e-portfolios. Okay, so these are some of the previous studies using a genre-based approach. By genre, we mean a different type of text, so the research article would be the genre in this case, but other genres would be lectures, textbooks, lab reports, etc., in the field of scientific discourse. Okay, so the first of these studies here in 1991, a very long time ago now. In that study, the teachers written about in this report used printouts. The students didn't actually work with the computer themselves. The teacher prepared printouts, concordance printouts, and worked with them, with the students. Yeah, and in these other studies, these people made use of corpora that were freely available online. And in this study by Lee and Swales, the students were shown how they could make their own corpus. Yeah, so a student of biology could download biology articles and compile a corpus so that they would have the specific language which was most useful for them, whilst a student in business could download research articles about business and have a corpus, dedicated corpus for their own use. And this study I've already talked about, getting the habit, trying to encourage students to use the approach long term. Then there's another study by Brezina who showed students how they could use Google Scholar as a corpus. Rather than making your own corpus, you could just use Google Scholar. And then there are a couple of studies using the genre-based approach. Okay, so I mentioned e-portfolio. So an e-portfolio is a digital archive of student work created by a learner that records evidence of the learner's experiences, progress, achievements, and self-reflections. So it can be used as an assessment tool, although this wasn't the case in the course I'm talking about here. So in our course, the students used Google Docs, Google Documents. Are any of you familiar with that? You know Google Docs? Yeah. So you can create files and you can share the files with your classmates or with your teacher, and the teacher can annotate the files, can show what you're doing well or what you're doing not so well, etc. Okay. Now, I mentioned this term textual mentor. A mentor is someone who advises you, who's like your teacher. A textual mentor is when you're learning to write, when you're trying to write, rather than just thinking, you actually look at writing in your field to see how experts write. Yeah? So it's a bit like plagiarism, okay? But it's not plagiarism. You don't copy the whole paragraph, but you can see well, I'll show you some examples in a minute. Yeah, you mustn't, and this is something, if you're doing this approach, you must tell the students they can't just copy big chunks, but they can apply what they read. Okay, so I call this approach language reuse. So you take language you find in your textual mentor and you use it in your own writing. You recontextualize it, if you like. I sort of came across this approach a long time ago, 1993. I wrote about this, where I was working in a university and my first degree was actually in French and Spanish. And this colleague of mine knew that I knew French, and she wanted to go to a conference in France, so she had to write the abstract for the conference paper in English and in French. So she asked me to translate her English abstract into French. Now, although I have a degree in French, I don't know anything about botany in French, and botany was the topic of the paper that my colleague was going to write. So what I did was I went to the library and I found a Canadian journal that published articles in English, but the abstracts were in English and French, because in Canada they have two languages. So I used the French versions of the abstracts to match up with the English abstract that my colleague had given me. Of course, they were on different topics. They were about botany, but they weren't on the same topic. But some of the uses of language were similar or the same. So I reused the language I found in the abstract, and I applied that into my translation. So this approach it's also been referred to as patch writing, although I don't like that because that suggests you take big chunks, yeah? Different levels of this approach, word-for-word copying, calquing, and paraphrasing. These are other terms. I don't really like the idea of word-for-word copying. I'll show you what I mean in a minute. Okay, so I did a study with a PhD student of mine, Yongyan Li, and we studied some Chinese postdoctoral students in mainland China. We wanted to find out how they wrote. They had to publish articles in international journals, but their English was not very good. So what they did, they used this language reuse. What they would do actually, they would download PDFs of articles on the similar topic they were working in, and then they would search these articles for language that they would be able to use in their own writing. Okay, so we wanted to use this approach, show students how they could use this approach, but show that how they could use it responsibly. Yeah, not copying. For example, in our study, we found that one of the participants in our research, he for the methodology section of his article, he copied it word for word from a published article. And when we asked him, well, you know, do you think this is okay? You're copying a whole methodology. Somebody else has written this. And he said, well, I'm using the same method as this other person, so why can't I use the same methodology? Well, actually, I think he's got quite a good point. But he might be accused of plagiarism if the editors of the journal found out about that. So that should not be encouraged. So we call this intertextuality, yeah, where you take language from one text and you put it into another. We do this all the time, actually. Everything we say, if you think about it, somebody has already said it. We never come up with anything totally original. Someone has already said it, even good morning. Okay, so intertextuality is using little bits of language that have been used elsewhere. We also wanted to use it at a higher level, at the level of the of the discourse, the structure of the discourse, and we called that interdiscursivity. Okay? Now, traditionally, interdiscursivity is encouraged. So we tell people how to write an article, like you have to have an abstract, you have to have an introduction. The introduction has to have a certain structure. Then you have to have a method that has to have a certain structure. This is accepted as reasonable pedagogical practice, but the intertextual level, the lower level borrowing is not so traditionally encouraged. Okay, so when I talk about this interdiscursivity, this the study of the larger units of discourse, I used the word move already at the beginning. I don't know if you noticed, but you can analyze texts according to moves, according to functional units. So Swales, a well-known linguist, John Swales, he studied the introductions of research articles, and he worked out that in the typical research article you have 3 moves. So you establish a territory, you say an important area of research recently is blah, 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 and maybe you say, so you give a little bit of review of the literature, and then you establish a niche. You say, well, this work has been done, but nobody has studied what I'm going to talk about. This is your niche, yeah? And then you tell the reader what you're going to tell them in the article. Okay, that's the typical structure of an introduction. And since that study, many linguists have looked at the other parts of the research article, like the results, the method, the discussion, to see what moves are typically used in those parts of the genre. Oh, what's happened here? Oh, okay. So we use this idea in designing this course I'm talking about here. And we also had a look at other work that had been published talking about the different linguistic features used in research articles. And there's quite a number of references here. So how did we do the teaching of this course? Okay, well, we presented the students with models of the move structures. So we showed them how to write an introduction with the 3 moves that I've told you about. And we did a similar thing for the other parts of the research article. We got students to learn how to do this by, we asked them to download articles from the library in their own discipline, articles that they would be working with typically, and then we asked them to identify the moves in those articles and to see if they matched up with what we'd shown them. And we used the Google Docs here so that they would send what they had written or what they'd analyzed to the teacher, and the teacher would be able to comment on it. Okay. There is a bit of variation across disciplines in terms of move structure. So because we had students from different disciplines, we got them to compare with their classmates. Okay, so then we showed students the typical linguistic features that they would need, and we showed them how to use this language reuse strategy. So typically, if you were doing the language reuse, if you think about the first move of the introduction to an article, it might be something. Recently, there have been many studies in X, okay? So if you were working not in X but Y, you could also say recently many studies have been conducted in Y. So you could reuse that language, because that language is very formulaic. Nobody is going to accuse you of plagiarism by using that, because so many other people have already used it. So the students would find these patterns in the articles that they had collected, and they would put them into the writing which we asked them to do. Okay. So here's an example of one student in this class. So her name was Karen. She's a first-year student, first-year PhD student. And she wrote a manuscript, and then she revised it using this reuse strategy. And the tutor, that's Simon Wang and myself, we spotted a problematic expression. She wrote, "The rat Iowa gambling task was a custom-designed computerized behavioral system and used to detect the decision-making by choosing between," and we thought this was a bit odd. Yeah. So we said to her, have a look at this, use a corpus, see if this is okay or not. So actually she used Google Scholar. She used Google Scholar as a corpus. Okay. So she got a concordance output like this. Do you notice anything about, this is what she wrote, detect the decision making, and then in the concordance she got detect the decision making deficit, detect the decision making impairment characteristic, detect the decision making performance, detect the decision making process. What difference do you notice between these examples and what she wrote? Nobody? Come on, should be able to. Detect the decision making by blah, blah, blah. The decision making deficit, decision making impairment characteristic, decision making performance. Okay, maybe you're shy. Well, the difference is, in every example here, from the textual mentor, from the corpus, decision-making is followed by a noun, one of those signaling nouns that I talked about, deficit, characteristic, performance, process. So decision-making is not typically used as a noun. She used it as a noun, right? The decision-making. Well, we don't use it. We talk about the decision-making, then a noun, process, problem, issue, whatever, okay? So that's the example from there. Now, another example with the same student, I think, to avoid the preferences of the wholes, blah, 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 blah. This looked a bit funny, the preference of the wholes. What does that mean? So in Chinese, we talked to this student, and she said, well, it's about stopping the rats from more likely going to one hole than another in this experiment she was doing, yeah? So she didn't know how to say that precisely. We didn't know how to say that, actually, the teacher. So we looked in the corpus, and we found these expressions: to allow an equal distance, to reduce spatial reference, to avoid thigmotaxic behavior. So we found some alternative ways So we would reuse, you could reuse these patterns to correct this rather unclear piece of writing that the student did. Okay, so just to conclude this part, so I've talked about an advanced EAP course for doctoral students in science, shown you how they use various tasks to create an e-portfolio. I've shown you how you can use this language reuse strategy both at the intertextual and at the higher level interdiscursive language. And I talked about the textual mentors. Okay, so quickly I'm going to give you the last part now. Am I okay for time here? Yes? Yeah, okay. All right, so this is a larger scale project that I'm going to talk about, designed to introduce the data-driven learning approach to research students, not just in one university, but in all of the universities in Hong Kong. Okay, so in this part, I'll give you some background. I'll talk about the target population, the objectives, design of the workshops, the outline of the workshop, some examples, talk about the progress, and show you the student evaluation. Okay, so I should have really said this earlier, but doesn't matter. Publishing research article is becoming more and more important, not just for professors, not just for teachers, but for students. Yeah, in many countries now, before you can graduate with a PhD or even with an MA or MSc now, you need to publish in an international journal. So this is very important, and in Hong Kong, where I used to work, it's very important too. Every 5 years, they have what they call the research assessment exercise, where they look at everybody's research output, and if you don't have any publications, you can get into trouble. Publish or perish, it's called. And I've done some research into this, the difficulties of people who use English as an additional language, writing for publication. And a colleague of mine studied the situation in Hong Kong, and she found that there's a general lack of a systematic approach to the provision of instruction in research publication. So in most universities, people are just expected to learn how to write articles on their own or with their supervisor. So we wanted to, with this project I'm going to tell you about, we wanted to introduce something across all of the universities to help students. So the project was a funded project. It was called under the Hong Kong Language-Related Collaborative Projects Initiative, and the project was called Data-Driven Learning for Research Students in Hong Kong. And there were basically it was me working with a postdoc student, Maylene Chen. We had some help from these other people you might have heard of who acted as consultants on the project. So the objectives were to develop 2 training packages for data-driven learning for research writing, one for students and one for teachers, to train students to use the DDL approach, to create an online forum, to investigate what extent teachers in Hong Kong are familiar with the approach, and to disseminate the approach across teachers and students in Hong Kong. So this is the target population of the project. So you see these are acronyms for the different universities in Hong Kong. There's, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 8 universities in Hong Kong, public universities. These are the numbers of research students in each of these universities. And these are the number of language teachers in the language centers in these universities. So we designed a workshop for the students. The 3.5-hour workshop was designed to introduce students to polishing their writing with available online corpora, to train students to improve their writing with discipline-specific corpora, to guide them through building their own corpus. We used various corpora and tools. So we used the academic component of BNC Web. I mentioned BNC, British National Corpus. Now that corpus can be subdivided into different varieties of language. So you can just look at the academic component, which we used. And BNC Web is just it's an online version of the BNC which you can use freely. You just have to go online, you register, and then you can use it. Okay. And also we used some discipline-specific corpora built by the postdoc in 6 different disciplines. So students could work with their own discipline. Yeah? And we used other software. Have you heard of AntConc? Yes, somebody said yes. All right. AntConc is a very commonly used concordance. Again, you can download it from the internet. It's free. And another piece of software that you can download, Ant File Converter. This is a piece of software that will convert PDF files into text files, because to create a corpus you need to use text files, not Word or PDFs. Yeah. Okay, so the workshop had 2 parts. First part, polish your writing with available online corpora. And here we used the BNC Web, and we showed them different ways of searching the corpus. And then in the second part, improve your writing with discipline-specific corpora. So the students work with the discipline-specific corpora that we had prepared for them. And we introduced them to some different functions. And then finally, we showed the students how they could build their own corpus. Yeah, so they could download articles which they themselves thought were useful textual mentors, useful models for them to work with. Okay, so here's an example of the sort of thing we got the students to do in the workshop. So the activities in the workshop were basically functional or task-based. So we would start, say, with a question: what are the verbs I can use when I need to report or interpret results? Yeah? So take indicate as an example, because we would ask students, well, what verbs do you use when you want to report results? And they would say, oh, indicate. Okay, so let's have a look at indicate in the BNC, and we would show students how they can use various search techniques, and then they would get an output like that. So this is what we call a lemma. A lemma refers to all the different forms of a word. So for indicate, the lemma includes indicate, indicates, indicating, indicated. Yeah. So the the corpus shows you the relative frequency of the different forms, and it shows you which words follow indicate. So indicate that, indicate by, indicate in, etc. Okay. So some typical patterns that the students could find would be to indicate that, followed by a noun phrase, indicated that, as indicated by, is indicated by, which indicates, have indicated that, etc. So they would find these are all different ways you can report results. You can use all of these patterns. Okay. So here's another example. How do I refer to tables, figures, diagrams, or formulas in research writing? Okay, so here we were trying to show students how they could look at collocation. A collocation is how a word typically occurs with another word. Yeah? And you can find these using the corpus techniques. So for this verb, for the word table, we would look for table, and we could see that table occurs with these different verbs. So shows, shown, see, gives, listed, given, summarize, summarizes, can't read that, are, etc. So these are all the different patterns that you can use with table, different ways you can refer to tables in a research article. Okay, so here are some examples from the concordance. So table X shows that blah blah is are shown in table X. We can see from table X. Table X gives, listed in table, is are given in table. Table X and Y show as table X illustrates. So the whole range of patterns you can use when you want to refer to a table. Okay, so somebody's leaving already. I'm nearly finished. Okay. Okay, so this is the project of the progress of this project. So it's finished now, actually. So progress is not really the appropriate word, but report on the project. So we actually ran 24 workshops in 6. UGC stands for University Grants Council. It's the organization that pays for the universities in Hong Kong. Yeah? So actually, 6.7% of the whole research PG student population attended, which is very good actually, because it wasn't compulsory. We just invited people to come if they wanted to. And you can just see here, these are the total number of students in the university. These are the participants. The red here, that refers to supervisors, because we invited supervisors to come to the workshops as well. So some of those did. And we got students from very many different disciplines. So Hong Kong University, we got students from 42 different disciplines. Okay, and this is just, again, showing the range of disciplines that we covered with these workshops. You can see they go from systems engineering to English language education, Chinese medicine even, chemical and molecular engineering. Okay, and we conducted an evaluation. All the students filled in an evaluation at the end of the workshop. So out of a score of 5, This one is low, but low is good. Low is good here because it meant that very few of the students had actually used corpora before they came to the workshop. So 4.5 out of 5, the quality of the workshops. This is probably the most interesting finding. 96% said they would recommend the workshop to a friend. So the reception of the workshops was very good, actually. We also included in the questionnaire an open-ended question: which aspects of the workshop did you find most useful and what improvements can we make? Well, we got a lot of comments, but the one that was most interesting for us was that we didn't use any student writing. Yeah? So quite a few students said it would be useful if we include student writing. Yeah? So one said a case study based on a real student research paper. Can ask people to submit a short writing sample, about 100 words, to get more information about the participants. Ask participants to write a paragraph of a paper and let them report their own weakness in academic writing. I'm not sure about the last one. I don't think students would be happy if we said, these are all the mistakes made by this student. Okay, but I think it would be useful to use some anonymous student work to show, for example, to look at discuss about, one of the examples I showed you, and to look for that in the corpus with the class and to see that actually discuss about doesn't actually occur in published writing. Okay, so the conclusions from the workshop were that they can be effective and efficient. We found out that the learning styles of the students could vary. So typically the more technical students, like if they were in computer engineering or any scientific difficult, they found it very easy. Yes, in fact, when I was observing one of the class, I was sitting next to a computer studies student, and he was ahead of the class. He was actually using regular expressions. I don't know, anyone know what a regular expression is? Yeah. Well, it's like a shortcut. It's a shortcut that computer programmers would use. He was writing his own program, basically, whilst he was following the class. But on the other hand, some of the students from humanities were rather slow. It took them a while to learn how to use some of the things we were showing them. So learning style may be an issue, yeah? And also computer literacy. Also the duration. Some students said the workshop was too long. Some said it was too short. And some liked to have the workshop in the morning, some liked to have it in the afternoon, some wanted to have it at the weekend. So if you were running them again, we would sort of try to allow for these variations. Okay, the pedagogical implications. It's important to create different activities for different learners. Learner corpora might be used, i.e. student writing, as I showed you was mentioned. And whilst introductory workshops can be very effective, we think that a full course would be actually even better if we want to encourage students to develop the corpus habit to use corpora systematically. And that's the end of the talk. Thank you very much.
If you have any questions, please raise your hand and we will have our staff run over to you. We have at the very back there.
Sorry. You need to encourage students to use it ethically. So not big, I would say not more than 4 or 5 words in a chunk that you want to reuse, yeah. Because then, yes, it would be picked up by something like Turnitin, yeah. Yes, okay.
It's okay.
Okay, my question is I think you mentioned so-called Hong Kong English or Thai English or maybe the Japanese English and the so-called world Englishes. But so when it comes to the writings or academic writings or journal writings, I think it's we have to we have to obey or some kind of a standard. So if we using this corpus or Googles, if we hit the so-called, as you mentioned, so-called discuss about or emphasize on, is it acceptable when students write this thesis or some academic writings?
Well, this is it's a good question. It's quite controversial nowadays because the traditional view is that, you know, if you want to publish in an international journal, you need to use so-called standard English, which means British or American English, really. But now there's a move. Some people are saying, well, actually, if you come from Hong Kong, if you come from Thailand, why should you follow these models? As long as your writing is comprehensible, shouldn't this be acceptable? Yeah? And in fact, if you look in some journals nowadays, you probably can find discuss about and emphasize on. So the approach I use with students is I tell them what I've just told you. I say, you know, in some journals you may find non-standard English, but on the other hand, some journals may be very fussy. So it's up to you whether you want to take a chance with your non-standard English or if you want to be careful and try and use standard English. But generally, editors try to be sympathetic. I did do a study where I interviewed a lot of journal editors and I asked them about the language and they said, well, as long as the language is comprehensible, then we can just encourage the writer to get a copy editor to help them. Yeah, they usually say this is controversial. Also, you know, get some help from a native speaker of English. I don't like that myself. A native speaker equivalent, I would say, because you get people who are non-native speakers who are perfectly proficient in the language. Yeah. So.
Any more questions from the audience, please? How about on this side? One moment, please.
Thank you very much for your lecture. And I totally agree with you, because when I was teaching students, I would tell them, you don't say discuss about, but you say discuss something. You don't say present about, you say present something. So, but then I also feel torn by the fact that I was thinking that by using this data-driven learning approach, it's not just about encouraging students to use language, but it's more like encouraging students to copy from native speakers. So, and my question is, would it be the way to get students to it would restrict their creativity in constructing the language or sentences, rather than encouraging them to use the sentences by themselves. Like me, when I use the language, I would go to Google search, for example. Oh, is it common to use it this way? And I feel like my creativity was limited in a sense. I mean, I was too afraid to construct my own sentences now, because I just kept going to the Google search. So, and that's, I think, I don't know how to go about all these things, because should I teach students to use this, or should I encourage them to be more creative with the language?
It depends who the students are. I mean, the students I'm talking about, the students who came to those classes that I described, they're typically, English is just a vehicle for them. They want to get their research published. And, you know, the most effective way is probably to do what you just said. You can, I wouldn't encourage people to use Google, because there's lots of non-standard English on Google. That's why a dedicated corpus is better. But on a more theoretical level, you know, Chomsky famously said that, you know, what distinguishes human beings from other animals, etc., is that human beings can create original sentences. Yeah, but actually, when you think about it, other linguists have said, well, actually, it's very difficult to come up with an original sentence. You write a sentence, you think it's original, but then you search online and you find, oh, somebody's already used that. So, for example, you know, the example I gave, when you're introducing your article, you know, in this paper, I will. Okay, so I don't think anyone would criticize you for using that. Yeah? So it's a question of degree. If you're teaching English majors, you know, then creative writing, well, then yes, I wouldn't encourage this approach there. Yeah.
Hello, good morning. Yeah, I am just like quite confused on what was discussed earlier, because in my case, I have handled Asian students, and currently I'm handling native English speakers. And every time I teach research, I would always use genre approach. We'll use make use of your papers, swales. But the problem is that when I ask students to follow the standards of academic language, they would often tell me that, no, we do it this way because like we're native speakers. But I would always emphasize that, yes, you are. However, these is the academic rigors. Like these are the standards that have been put forwarded in terms of writing academic papers. But when I try to do it to the Asian levels, Asian students, it works. However, I think I have the same point with what was asked earlier, wherein the creativity is being sacrificed for the reasons that they work on patterns. I believe this is okay for undergraduates. I mean, like for early courses in English writing, but once they reach onto the higher level, I think that it is hampering the development of the writing skills. So I'm just quite confused on how to reconcile the idea that how do I impose academic language in academic writing when I'm talking to native English speakers and to that of the Asian learners.
Okay, so there's at least two questions there. With regard to the native speakers, yeah. Just because you're a native speaker doesn't mean you know how to write a research article, okay? So it's a particular genre, and native speakers have to learn this genre just the same as non-native speakers, or I prefer the term English for English as an additional language users. You should tell your native speakers, well, I'm sorry, you know, you can probably have a conversation in English and you can write an email in English, but you need to learn the conventions of writing an academic article. Yeah? So that's what I would say for the native speakers. For the non-native speakers, I think basically it's the same. I would give you the same answer as I gave to this lady. If you're teaching creative writing, then perhaps this is not the way to go, although you could use it in moderation. Yeah. I think just one more question. There was somebody else. My email address. It's quite easy, actually. It's johnflowerdew888 @gmail.com. But you can Google me. You just type in John Flowerdew, and then Flowerdew is a very unusual name. So there is one other John Flowerdew, actually, who's a professor. He's an emeritus professor at Cambridge, and he studies rats and mice. So don't email him, okay? But I actually have my own website, yeah? So if you just write John Flowerdew website, you'll get my website, you get my email, and most of my articles are there. You can download my articles too, if you want to. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes.
Very nice audience.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. John Flowerdew, for the time and effort you took to share your thoughts and experiences with us. And since many of us are probably working on papers right now, we feel that we can benefit a lot from your timely advice here. As a sign of gratitude from our part, may I ask our Dean, Assistant Professor Dr. Jare Singhat Govin, to give our token of appreciation to Professor Dr. John Flowerdew, please. And just before you go, once you complete it, please return it to the registration table outside.
Okay, and just a couple reminders here. Lunch will be served on the 7th floor of this building, 7th floor. So you take the elevator and you go up to the 7th floor. And be sure to bring your tickets or coupons with you that you got when you registered this morning. And concurrent presentations will take place on the 8th floor at 1 p.m. So be sure that you will be there on time. And for presenters, you may want to go there a little bit early to get things set up. Okay. If you have any questions, again, let our staff members know. Oh, lunch will be served at 11:30. Okay, at 11:30 on the 7th floor. I believe it's room 702 and 703. Okay. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you back here tomorrow for the other keynote address on culture and Thai studies.
Exactly. And if you have time before 11:30, you want to take a look around our campus, please do so. If you have any questions, also come to us.
All right, thank you very much.
Hope to see you again this afternoon. Bye-bye.